Michael Turner never thought a blind date could change anything. For him, life was simple and unforgiving. Oil-stained shirts, late-night shifts at the garage, and bedtime stories whispered to his little girl. But the night he walked into a glittering restaurant filled with chandeliers and strangers in suits, his world tilted. Across the room, a hush spread as she appeared. Victoria Hayes, the paralyzed CEO whose name filled newspapers and whose silence had become legend. He expected judgment, pity, or another wall of coldness. Instead, what happened at that table would stun them both and leave an entire room breathless. Because before the night was over, this woman who hadn't smiled in years would break into laughter. And it was because of him. The restaurant was the kind of place where men wore tailored suits and women floated in gowns that shimmered under amber chandeliers. Michael Turner felt out of place the moment he stepped in. His shirt was clean but clearly worn, the cuffs softened from years of use. He had combed his hair twice before leaving his modest apartment, but the mirror could not erase the lines of exhaustion etched from late nights juggling work and fatherhood. He had not chosen to be here. His best friend had signed him up for the dating app, then booked this blind date on his behalf, insisting, "You deserve one night for yourself." Michael disagreed. He had long accepted that romance wasn't in his cards. After his wife died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving him alone to raise their daughter Emma, his heart had locked itself away. His world had narrowed into two things: providing for Emma and surviving the grind of double shifts at the auto shop. But here he was, awkwardly pulling out a chair, glancing at strangers who looked as though they belonged in glossy magazines. Then she entered. The room shifted, heads turned, whispers rose. Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Global, rolled in on a sleek black wheelchair. She was a woman everyone recognized from financial news segments and business magazines. The iron rose. Her tailored navy dress accentuated her sharp elegance, her gaze cold, her posture proud. The world saw power. Michael saw a woman whose eyes carried an ache she worked hard to hide. For a second, he thought it was a mistake. Surely she wasn't his date. But when the hostess guided her toward his table, Michael's stomach tightened. He stood quickly, fumbling to help, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "Don't," she said with a clipped tone, maneuvering her chair with practiced ease. "I can handle it." The wall was up before they'd even exchanged names. The first minutes were torture. Michael cleared his throat, tried to start with small talk about the menu. She glanced at him briefly, then looked away, her fingers drumming the table lightly. He felt judged, exposed, the mechanic in a room full of executives. She looked as though she was waiting for the punchline of a cruel joke, as if expecting him to admit someone dared him to meet her. He almost walked out. He had promised himself not to waste time on people who looked down on him. But then his phone buzzed, and he answered without thinking. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, voice softening instantly. Across the table, Victoria's eyes flickered. "Yes, Daddy will be home soon. Did you brush your teeth already?" "Uh-huh. Bedtime story, of course. I'll tell you the one about the brave fox tonight." His expression changed as he listened. Gentle, patient, every word soaked in love. "Good night, Emma. I love you to the moon and back." When he hung up, silence fell between them. For the first time, Victoria's mask slipped. Her lips curved, almost reluctantly, into a small smile. "You're different," she murmured, as though surprised at herself for saying it aloud. Michael blinked, not sure what she meant. "I haven't smiled in years," she admitted, her voice quieter now, edged with something fragile. Michael sat back, caught off guard. A moment ago, this had felt like a disaster. Two mismatched souls forced to share a table. Yet that one phone call, that glimpse into his heart, cracked something inside her. The atmosphere shifted from icy tension to tentative warmth. He saw not the untouchable CEO, but a woman who carried loneliness heavier than her wheelchair. She saw not just a weary mechanic, but a father whose devotion lit up his entire being. As they continued their meal, the sharp edges dulled. She asked about Emma, and he spoke with cautious pride. Her drawings on the fridge, her questions about the stars, how she sometimes insisted on sleeping with her stuffed rabbit because it guarded dreams. Victoria listened, her expression softening with each word. For once, she wasn't the subject of scrutiny or pity. She was simply part of a conversation that felt human. By the time dessert arrived, Michael realized he no longer wanted to leave. And Victoria, who had entered the restaurant convinced she would endure another hollow evening, found herself laughing, really laughing, when Michael recounted Emma's stubborn attempt to fix a toaster with toy tools. The sound startled her, yet it also freed her. As the night drew to a close, both understood something unspoken had begun. A single unexpected smile had broken through years of grief and walls. Neither of them knew what would follow, but the seed had been planted. Destiny, it seemed, had chosen this night to reroute both their lives. The days that followed their blind date were not what either of them expected. Michael tried to convince himself it had just been one evening, a fleeting spark. Yet when Victoria called, her tone clipped but oddly tentative, asking if he wanted to meet again for coffee, he found himself saying yes before he had the chance to second-guess. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often, sometimes over quiet dinners, sometimes when she stopped by the auto shop under the pretense of checking her car, though Michael knew her luxury sedan hardly needed tinkering. What surprised him most was how natural it felt to talk to her once the initial walls came down. She asked questions about Emma, about how he managed fatherhood on his own, and listened with an attentiveness that made him feel seen. For her part, Victoria let down fragments of her armor. She confessed the nights she spent awake, reliving the accident that had taken her mobility. She admitted how isolating it was to lead a company from a wheelchair, every gesture scrutinized by board members who doubted her strength. Behind the headlines that painted her as ruthless and untouchable was a woman carrying invisible scars. Michael understood scars. His were different, but just as deep. He remembered the night of the accident that took his wife, the silence in the hospital waiting room, the promises he whispered to his newborn daughter that he would never let her feel abandoned. Sharing these memories with Victoria felt dangerous, like opening a wound, but somehow also necessary. Still, the differences between them loomed. He was a man who smelled of motor oil, working overtime to cover bills. She was a woman who commanded skyscraper boardrooms. It was a gulf not easily bridged. Their fragile connection faced its first true test at a charity gala hosted by Hayes Global. Michael had been reluctant to attend, convinced he would stick out like a sore thumb among the suits and gowns. But when Victoria asked him, her voice steady but her eyes betraying vulnerability, he agreed. He wore the only suit he owned, the same one he had worn at his wedding and later at his wife's funeral. Walking into the ballroom, he felt every pair of eyes turn toward him, whispers brushing past like cold drafts. Victoria, poised in her chair, introduced him as her guest. Murmurs rippled. People were surprised she wasn't accompanied by a billionaire banker or a fellow CEO. For a while, the evening went smoothly. Michael even managed to make Victoria laugh when he joked about being hopeless with tiny hors d'oeuvres. But then it happened. A group of board members, emboldened by champagne and their own disdain, made comments loud enough for everyone to hear. They mocked her for parading charity while hiding her own weakness. One man sneered, "A CEO in a wheelchair. It's tragic, really. No wonder the company's vulnerable." Laughter followed. Cameras from a nearby tabloid crew swiveled to capture the moment. Michael froze. He could see the flicker in Victoria's eyes, the way she forced her face into neutrality, as though she had practiced hiding her pain for years. Something in him snapped. He stepped forward, voice low but carrying across the room. "You think strength is measured by whether someone can walk across a room? You think leadership is about standing tall? No, it's about resilience. It's about showing up, day after day, when life has taken everything and you still refuse to break. She's stronger than all of you put together." The room fell silent. Even the cameras stopped clicking. For a moment, all Michael could hear was the thrum of his own pulse. Victoria looked at him, her expression unreadable, but there was a sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. He had said what she could not. He had defended not her title, not her image, but her dignity. Later that night, as they slipped out of the gala, she whispered, "No one has ever done that for me before." Michael only shrugged, awkward, trying to downplay it, but inside something shifted between them. The shift became even more complicated days later when Michael stumbled upon something he hadn't expected. While closing the shop one evening, he recognized a name on a news headline linked to Victoria's accident: Robert Kane, a powerful board member at Hayes Global. Michael's stomach dropped. He remembered that name from years earlier. Kane had been connected to the trucking company involved in his wife's crash, the one where Michael's testimony had been quietly dismissed in court. He had buried the bitterness, chalking it up to the unfairness of the world. But seeing that name tied to Victoria's tragedy was like uncovering a hidden thread binding their fates. When he told her, Victoria's face went pale. She had long suspected her accident wasn't just bad luck, that someone in the board had tampered with safety checks to secure power. But to hear Michael, an outsider, confirm the same man had crossed both their lives was almost too much. She wheeled away, shaking her head. This changes everything." For Michael, the guilt resurfaced. He had once chosen silence, afraid of losing his job, afraid of raising a newborn alone. Now that silence connected him to her pain. By the end of the week, they stood at an emotional crossroads. Victoria's trust was shaken. Michael's shame weighed heavy. The bond they had built felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. And yet, beneath the fractures, both knew the truth. They had stumbled into each other's lives for a reason. For days after the revelation about Robert Kane, silence stretched between Michael and Victoria. She withdrew behind walls thicker than before, burying herself in meetings, surrounding herself with advisors who spoke in numbers but never in truth. Michael, ashamed of the years he had kept quiet, returned to his small apartment above the garage, focusing on Emma and the routine that had kept him alive since his wife's death. They both knew the bond between them had been shaken to its core. But destiny had not finished weaving their story. One Saturday morning, while Michael worked under the hood of a customer's car, Emma slipped away. By the time he noticed, she had already found her way across town to Hayes Tower. Security guards called Victoria, unsure what to do with the little girl clutching a drawing pad. When Victoria came down to the lobby, she was met by Emma's wide eyes and trembling hands holding up a picture. It showed 3 figures: Victoria in her chair, Michael with his grease-stained shirt, and Emma between them, holding both their hands beneath a night sky filled with stars. At the bottom, in uneven letters, Emma had written, "Family." Victoria's throat tightened. The child's innocent gift pierced through the layers of pain and pride she had built. For years, she had taught herself not to cry in front of anyone. But in that moment, tears slipped down her cheeks freely. She bent forward, touching Emma's small hand. "You drew this?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Daddy doesn't smile much anymore, but when he talks about you, he does. I just want him to smile again." Later that evening, Michael arrived at Hayes Tower in a panic, ready to apologize for Emma's intrusion. Instead, he found Victoria waiting with the drawing resting on her lap. She looked at him with raw vulnerability. "Your daughter reminded me what I had forgotten. Love isn't weakness, it's survival." Michael lowered his eyes, ashamed. "I should have spoken up years ago. Maybe things would be different for both of us." She shook her head. "You did what you had to do to protect Emma, but now we have a choice. We don't have to let Kane win again." Together they began piecing through old files. Michael unearthed a copy of his testimony from his wife's case, hidden among boxes in the garage. Victoria dug into records from her accident, uncovering discrepancies in safety reports signed off by Kane. Their stories, once separate tragedies, fused into one undeniable truth. The confrontation came at the next board meeting, a gathering already buzzing with rumors. Kane sat smugly, certain his influence was untouchable. But when Victoria rolled in with Michael at her side, cameras flashing from invited press, the atmosphere shifted. She spoke with a calm authority. For years you tried to bury us under silence. Tonight, we bury the lies instead. Michael stepped forward, presenting the evidence. Documents tying Kane's company to both the faulty truck brakes that killed his wife and the neglected safety checks that led to Victoria's paralysis. Gasps filled the room. Kane's face drained of color as reporters surged forward. In that moment, the power dynamic inverted. Victoria, once doubted, stood as unbreakable. Michael, once invisible, became the voice that carried the truth. And together, they shattered the illusion of Kane's untouchable reign. When the dust settled, consequences followed swiftly. Kane was stripped of his seat, investigations launched, and Hayes Global began repairing its fractured reputation. But for Michael and Victoria, the victory wasn't about the boardroom. It was about reclaiming pieces of themselves stolen by fear and loss. Weeks later, at a community event organized for single parents and people living with disabilities, Michael watched as Victoria spoke to the crowd, Emma by her side. Her voice rang steady. Strength isn't defined by walking tall or standing alone. Strength is in choosing to love, even when the world has broken you. The audience erupted in applause. Afterward, as the sun dipped low and the three of them walked, or rolled, through the park, Emma reached up to hold their hands. Michael glanced at Victoria, and for the first time, the weight in his chest lifted. She smiled at him, the same smile that had startled him on their first date. But now it carried something deeper: trust, hope, and a promise of healing. Their lives were no longer defined by tragedy, but by the choice to move forward together. Love had not erased the scars, but it had transformed them into something stronger, a foundation. And as the night sky shimmered above, Michael realized Emma's drawing had not been a dream. It had been a glimpse of their future. Love, in the end, was never about perfection or power. It was about choosing to show up for one another when the world tried to break you. Michael's devotion as a single dad and Victoria's courage to smile again proved that scars can become the very soil where hope grows. Together, they rewrote their story from tragedy to healing, from silence to truth, from loneliness to family. And perhaps that's the lesson for all of us. No matter how heavy the past, there's always a chance for light to break through. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe for more soul-stirring tales that remind us of the power of love and second chances.